Chapter 6. Glissa stood alone outside a large building on the edge of a rushing river. The sky was black. None of Mirrodin's 4 moons shone overhead, a rarity. Glissa had seen times when more than one of the moons seemed to occupy the same place in the sky. One would cover the other, bathing the tangle in an inescapable blinding light. Strange things occurred at these times, and it was always one of these convergences that marked the time before a festival or ritual. Now the times of darkness were fewer and far between. If one side of the plane was in darkness, it meant all the moons were on the other side at the same time. Glissa knew what it meant when 2 of the moons were in alignment. It was the time for the rebuking ceremony. Time for all elves to give up their memories. It had been this ceremony that had caused her the most trouble while she had been in the tangle. Giving up on all the things she'd experienced in this lifetime seemed like such a waste. It had been her decision to forego the rebuking that had touched off this strange series of events that led her to her present situation. The darkness was deeper than ever she'd seen. This was no simple convergence. Numerous rebuking ceremonies had come and gone since she was a child. This time, however, all the moons were lining up, something that had never happened in her lifetime. If the runes on the Tree of Tales could be trusted, it was something that had only happened 4 times in the history of the world. That was why she'd come to see Brenna. Glissa knocked on the door of the wizard's tin home, but there was no answer. Pushing aside the chrome-like curtain, the elf slipped inside the square building. The interior was dark, but she could see a faint blue glow coming from the room deeper in the house. Following the light, she made her way to a place where she had first seen Brenna looking over a series of maps spread out over a large table. The room was still quite dark, lit by magically glowing stone that hovered in the air. It cast a perfect circle of light on the floor, throwing the rest of the room into long, deep shadows. Before the glowing stone, Brenna sat cross-legged, her hands pressed together as if in prayer, and her eyes closed. Glissa stepped in quietly inside the room. "Hello, Glissa," said Brenna, not opening her eyes. "Please, come join me." Glissa crossed to the female wizard, circling around a long table still covered in rolled maps. She sat down facing Brenna. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Brenna smiled but didn't open her eyes. "You're not disturbing me. I'm doing a little meditative exercise my people call Mulla Bonda. It's a practice to still the mind and heal the body." Glissa was a little uncomfortable. She'd never seen anybody sit like that, or that still. It still seemed like a luxury, and boring. "I'll try to be quiet," she said. Brenna's smile widened. "There is no need. Part of my exercise is to focus while confronted with distraction. Please, talk to me. Tell me what you need." Glissa shrugged. "Okay." She paused. "Brenna, the moons are aligning." "Yes, I noticed. It is very dark. Darker than I have ever seen in my lifetime. This convergence is different. In the tangle, when the moons align, it marks the coming of a new phase. It's the time of cleansing and renewal. I've heard of elf rituals. Well, I haven't been much of a believer in all these things, but until I had seen it with my own eyes, I didn't believe that Mirrodin was hollow. And now you're beginning to question yourself?" Glissa took a deep breath. "Well, wouldn't you?" "Yes, I would." Brenna opened her eyes, her smile gone. "I am." Glissa felt a sudden rush of relief. "I'm frightened, Brenna." "As am I." Brenna lowered her hands to her lap and nodded. "But that fear is comforting." "I don't understand. I would be more concerned about myself as a human if I felt nothing during a troubling time. It is natural for elves as well as to fear things they don't understand. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether or not that fear is something we should be fearing, but rather how are we going to react to it." "You mean we should be trying to find out how to stop the moons from aligning?" Brenna smiled. "No, there is nothing we can do about the form of nature." Glissa wrinkled her brow. "I don't understand." "We have surprisingly little control over our destinies, yet we still manage to accomplish many things in a lifetime. Changing the course of the moons isn't within our power to control, but how we react to such an event, personally, emotionally, spiritually, We do have some ability to steer. The question we must ask ourselves now is not what we must do, but what are we afraid of in our own shadows? Brenna leaned forward. Are you going to let the convergence of the moon stop you in your task? Or will you face your challenges, fearful but unstoppable? Glissa did not hesitate. I must go find the trolls again. They're the ones who started me down this path. Maybe they'll be able to answer my questions. Maybe even tell me more about my role in all of this. Brenna nodded. I have heard that the trolls are very old, and that they know many great things. Will you come with me? I could use the help. The wizard shook her head. I cannot. My leg needs more healing, and my people need my guidance. There will be much more to deal with when the Vidal can come. It was Gus's turn to nod. I will promise you this, though. When the time comes, we will fight with you. We will help you free this world and fulfill your destiny. Thank you. No, Glitter, it is I who should thank you. After several long rotations of travel, the Tree of Tangles rose up tall before Glisser, Slowbad, and Bosch. It's good to be home. It's been a long time, said Glisser. Bosch lifted the pair off of his shoulders and set them gently on the ground. Where will we find the trolls? In the Tree of Tales, explained Glisser, deeper within the tangle. Elf, Goblin, and Golem made their way through the metallic forest. As they went, Glisser ran her eyes over the familiar ground, bringing back a flood of memories. She saw clearly her mother, father, and sister, their faces calm and comforting. They drifted away, replaced by her memory of the horror of the level of attack that had killed them all. She would never forget that terrible sound the scythe blades made, and the blood. Everything was slick with blood. Her memories faded, replaced by visions of trees with leaves and a world with soft things and a sky of deep blue. A wind slipped lazily through the trees, and Glisser looked to the ground. Patches of green wavered in the breeze. She reached down, and her fingers ran over the edges. She pulled back her hand away, expecting to see blood where the leaves had cut her flesh to ribbons, but there was nothing. Just smooth, soft skin. No cuts, no blood. She examined her hand more closely. There was no metal. The blades that extended from her knuckles were gone. She checked her shins. They too had no metal. Her whole body had transformed. Everything was flesh, soft, warm, and forgiving. She was filled with panic. She reached for her sword, but it too was gone. She was defenseless, with no weapons and no claws. A crash made her look up. 2 huge trees cracked in half, each falling away from the other, tumbling into the other trees, smashing away limbs and scattering branches as they hurled towards the ground. Between them towered a gigantic construct. Its gleaming metal chest stood out in the stark contrast of the forest, and the soft plants all around. Its head, arms, and legs were glowing blue, as if it were completely formed from magic. The creature stared down at Glisser. She felt very small and tried to turn away. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The creature took a step towards her, and the ground trembled. Glisser tried to scream, but no sound came from her mouth. She drew a breath and tried again. Still nothing. The construct took another step, then bent down, reaching out. Its huge glowing fingers wrapped around Glisser's body, and she was lifted from the ground. Glisser came to on the ground, Cybad's face right above her. You okay, huh? Glisser nodded. She had these visions from time to time. They were called flares, and she dreaded them. They were flashes, really pictures that ran in her head. All elves had them, but Glisser's were stronger and more vibrant than most. No one knew for certain what they were. Glisser thought of them as waking dreams, the possibilities of her mind showing themselves in brilliant colours. The elders in the tribe had claimed the flares were visions of the future. Most elves did not believe that. Who could really see into the future? Sometimes the visions blinked in and out, as if she were opening and closing her eyes while spun in a circle. Each time her eyes focused again, a different scene filled her vision. It was only for a split second. Then it was as if her eyes closed again, and she moved on, looking moments later upon something completely different. No golem? Glisser said. No golems. Bosch seemed concerned. Are there no golems allowed in the Tree of Tales? The elf shook her head, dazed. No, that's not what I was talking about. I'm sure they'll allow you in. She stood up. They had better let you in. What are you talking about then, crazy elf? Asked Slowbad. I had another flare. Slowbad stood upright and looked at her with wide eyes. No, it's okay, I'm fine. What did you see? Asked the big golem. I saw a different world again. A world without metal. A world without golems? No, there was a golem, or at least what I thought was a golem. Gussa shook her head, trying to clear it. It meant something, huh? I don't know, but it seemed like a nice place. She looked at Bosch. All except about the golem part. I'm not sure it was a nice golem. She touched Bosch's arm. Like you. She shrugged. There were soft things there, like the blankets and beds we stayed in Buena's village. Even the grasses and bushes were soft. The goblin gasped. Soft razor grass? It wasn't really razor grass, it just looked like it. She straightened and headed deeper into the tangle. It was nothing. Get going. The trio walked in silence for some time. The closer they got to the Tree of Tales, the more memories crept into Glussa's mind. She thought of Cain wearing the armor of the Tel-Gelad chosen. A deep sadness filled her chest. It felt heavy, as if a Vorak was standing on her chest. A knot in the bottom of her stomach moved and fluttered, as if she'd swallowed a live bird. A voice brought her from her reverie. Glussa? Glussa looked up from the ground. The figure before her wore the red ceremonial armor of the Tel-Gelad. For a moment, Glussa saw a different face. Cain? The elf looked at her sideways. No. Glussa looked around. While she had been thinking of her best friend, she walked up right to the front of Tree of Tales. The guard stepped to one side, indicating to the side of the tree with a sweep of his hand. Glussa stared at him, confused. What's this? You're just going to let me inside the tree? The Tel-Gelad nodded. Slowbad sidled up to her. You sure about this, crazy elf? Last time we were here, I think you killed the old troll, huh? Glussa nodded. They haven't attacked us yet, she said. Besides, she looked up at Bosch. We've got a golem. Slowbad threw up his hand, and the three of them headed towards the tree. Glussa stepped between the roots, pushing through the rounded vines that hung down, obscuring the entrance to the Tree of Tales. Inside the trio were greeted by a large, imposing troll. His face was round and covered in warts, and his shoulders were slouched forward, as if his head were too heavy to be held up by his thick neck. Young Glussa, we were expecting you. Do I know you? No, but Master Droog knows you. He is awaiting you upstairs. The elf eyed the troll. His manner was controlled and introspective, the exact opposite of threatening, and he appeared harmless. Harmless for a troll. He had carried no visible weapons and moved with a swiftness that belied his great size. Who is Master Droog? He is the eldest, the newest leader of the trolls. With that, he bowed his head and stepped aside, indicating with a flourish on his hand the stairway leading deeper into the tree. Glussa looked at the other two. Slowbad sighed, but nodded, and they headed up. The steps were cut from the tree itself. Circular scoring, covering every inch of the tarnished steps, formed a pleasing pattern. It almost seemed as if someone had polished the shape of the stairs into the metal, leaving a series of tiny circles. None of the circles were complete, each one having a vague beginning and ending that seemed to flow into one another beside it. At the top of each step, the linked swirls bent at an edge and continued up, wrapping from the side of one step onto the top of the next. The interconnected circles formed a collection of chains that led up and around the spiral staircase. The surface of each step was rough, not magically honed like the scythe blades of the levelers or the wings of the hoverguard. These had been made by hand. It made Glussa's back hurt just thinking about the amount of work it would take to scratch out such a feature in a solid metal tree. Judging by the obvious wear and tear, the large patches of heavy tarnishing, this had been done a long, long time ago. The group moved on in silence, finally reaching the top where the stairs opened into a large room. A set of rising bleachers edged the chamber, and sitting on them, 3 rows deep, were perhaps 100 or more trolls. All of them resembled the other trolls Glussa had seen. Their skin was green and loose, their hands and shoulders covered in warts and scars, and each was dressed in tattered woven metal fabrics. Even to the elf who had grown up in the tangle, Living near such creatures, she couldn't tell them apart. Now seated here, they all looked like a fungus or vertebrae that grew on the base of the fallen tree. Opposite the stairs in the centre of the curved bleacher seats, a single troll perched on a stool. All the others had their bodies turned towards him, and their eyes focused on his large frame. This one, unlike the others, wore newer clothing. He held himself more erect, and seemed to have more energy than the others. His eyes darted around the room. This was not a contemplative examination or a sluggish struggle by a slow mind to understand. This was an intelligent look of a decisive creature. The troll at the head of the room held a bone staff in one hand. With the other, he waved the trio forward.
"Come in, come in."
Gusser and Slowbad did as they were told, stopping amid the throng of trolls just before the bone-wielding chief. Bosch, though, had a difficult time getting inside the room. At his full height, his head was much taller than the ceiling. The golem tried to bend at the waist, but ducking didn't provide enough room for him to bring his massive frame into the carved-out chamber. After several attempts to fold himself in various different ways, each of which proved more ridiculous and less useful than the last, Bosch finally collapsed his legs and head halfway, telescoping them inside his body. The truncated golem waddled as he walked, but managed to fit, if tightly, inside the room. The troll looked them over.
"We have been waiting for your arrival."
"So we've been told. That disturbs me."
"Why would that disturb you, young Gusser?"
"Well, to begin with, the last time I was here, Elder Chumph died in my arms." Droog nodded, his eyes on the ground.
"A tragic blow for us."
He took a deep breath.
"You should know that we do not blame you."
"You don't?" The troll chief shook his head.
"No. The Elder Council has found you innocent, and the traitors among us have been purged."
Gusser looked around at the trolls on the bleachers. They all hung their heads. "Traitors? You mean there was more than one?" Droog nodded.
"I'm afraid so."
Gusser stood in silence. She was relieved that the trolls didn't think she had killed their chief, but she was saddened as well. All of this treachery and infighting was due to her. If she had been at home that night, if she had been killed along with the rest of her family, none of this would have happened to the trolls. The troll chief tapped his staff on the floor.
"You have other reasons for being disturbed by us welcoming you back?"
Gusser swallowed and then nodded. "Well, yes, everyone seems to know where I'm going, and what I'll do before I even do it."
"Yes," replied the troll. "I see your point."
"And since they know where I am at all times, I seem to be everyone's favourite target for an ambush."
"Role none wish to play, but one that falls upon the shoulders of a hero."
"A hero?" Gusser stopped to think about that word. "Why would you call me that?" The troll cocked his head, looking at the young elf.
"Because your efforts are not just focused on yourself."
"Wait a minute. How do you know what it is I even want, or why I was even coming here?"
"A simple deduction," replied the troll. "The last time you were here, you wanted to know about the Guardian. You did not believe us then. You have returned. Thus, I suspect you have seen proof, and now you are beginning to believe that which Chumph believed, and you wish for answers."
"What did Chumph believe?"
"That you have a destiny beyond the borders of the Tangle. That your path is far longer than you know."
The troll smiled, his stained, ground-flat teeth poking from the wart-covered lips, looking menacing yet warm at the same time. Slowbad pulled on Gusser's arm. "Who is this guy, huh?" "That's a good question," said Gusser. She looked up from the goblin. "Who are you?" The troll bowed.
"Forgive my lack of hospitality. I am Droog, chief teller of tales. These," he waved his arms to the indicator of the collected trolls, "these are all that is left of my kind."
Gusser scanned the room. There were a lot of trolls here, more than she'd ever seen in one place at one time. Still, the thought saddened her. This was all of them, every last one. The group no longer seemed so large. She laid her gaze upon Droog once again. "So you figured out that I would come back, but that still doesn't answer my questions about why you called me a hero. What makes you think I'm not just looking out for myself?" The troll placed his hand on his jaw, rubbing his bumpy chin.
"Sometimes a hero is not a hero by choice. Sometimes a hero is a hero because the actions make her one. Whether you know it or not, Your quest is one that will benefit many people, perhaps everyone on Mirrodin.
Droog lowered his head.
Although the trolls have known about Memnoch, have known not only that he existed, but also that he controlled the levelers and the devices that plague the land, we...
His voice trailed off. The rumpled troll stared at the floor for a long while. Gussa looked at him, bending her knees, trying to get down close enough to the floor to get his attention. Yes, she said, trying to coax it from him.
We have been afraid, he said finally.
But when I was last here, Chump was very reluctant to talk with me. He told me very little and seemed quite guarded, almost as if he would be punished for telling me what I wanted to know. Gussa paused, watching Droog stare at the floor. Now you rush me inside and greet me as if I were one of you? Why such a drastic change? Droog raised his eyes.
Chump was the oldest among us and the wisest. Now he is gone, and a new fear has entered the troll tribe. The fear that we will all be gone, taken from this place, as Chump was. As you can see, there are only a few of us left. We cannot face Memnoch and his army of devices alone. We are too few.
Droog paused, taking a deep breath.
We are too afraid.
What does that have to do with me?
Your destiny has been set in motion. There is no longer time to debate if or when. It has come. The time is now, and the events will continue forward whether you are ready or not.
I still don't understand. Droog raised his bone staff.
We all have kin who have fallen to the Guardian's armies. We want you to succeed.
Are you saying you're going to help me to confront the Guardian? Droog once again scratched his chin.
When the time is right, yes.
Slowbad pulled on Gus's arm.
When that be, huh? We come back then.
The troll laughed at the back of his throat.
I'm afraid I cannot tell you the future. Only the trolls will participate when all has been prepared.
Prepared? Gussa shook her head. What are you talking about? You make it sound as if there's some sort of predetermined course that we are all destined to follow? That I'm the one leading? Am I missing something here? Droog rose from his chair and ambled forward. The quickness of his words and the sharp intellect in his eyes had distracted Gussa from noticing one important detail about the troll chieftain. He had only one leg. The bone staff he had been holding was a crutch, and he leaned on it as he moved forward. His steps were awkward and metered, very much as Gussus expected from a troll. When he came close enough to touch the trio, he stopped and smiled.
I am sorry. I do not mean to confuse you. I forget that all this information is new to you. For the trolls, it has been that way of a life, a belief.
He leaned down, lowering his face so that he could look into Gus's eyes.
We do not belong on Mirrodin. The trolls.
He waved his hand around, indicating all the creatures seated in the bleacher seats.
We are not from this world. We do not wish to stay here any longer than we must.
Wait, Gussa sank down into the metal floor. You're from some other world?
Yes.
How is it that I can help you? It's not as if I can lift you to some other plane.
You can help us escape from the tyranny of the Guardian. That is the path you will travel. That is the destiny that has been chosen for you.
You speak as if I don't have any choice in the matter.
You do not.
The elf snorted. If all of you, Gussa ran her eyes around the room, taking in the entire troll tribe, with your big muscles and strong fists can't stand up to Memnoch and his devices, what makes you think I can?
Because you are not afraid.
Of course I'm afraid, Gussa shouted. In fact, I can't remember anything more than a brief instant of my entire life when I wasn't afraid of something. The troll nodded, apparently unperturbed by her outburst.
Yes, it is something that transcends the racial boundaries. Fear binds us together and makes us all the same.
Droog placed his huge hand on the petite elf's shoulder.
What makes us different, you and I? That despite the fear that you feel, you go on.
Slowly Glyssa nodded. Now she understood. Droog turned and limped past his seat.
As I said, when the time is right, the trolls will come to your aid.
When he reached the far wall of the chamber, he placed his crutch aside, flattening his palms against the metal. He spoke a single word and the cabinet disappeared. It was a square box,
about the size of a small goblin, the same colour and texture as the surrounding wall. If Gussa hadn't been watching, she might have thought it had been there the entire time. It blended in with the rest of the chamber as if it had been carved from the tree. Just like the steps, Droog reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small casket. "Do not think I would send you off empty-handed." The troll waved the trio forward. They approached, and Glissa put her finger out to touch the casket. It was of exquisite workmanship, carved in patterns she did not recognize. She didn't want to stop touching it. "You like that?" asked the troll. "Yes. What is it?" "It is wood from the tree not of this world, many thousands of years ago. It is said that my people, the trolls, lived in these trees." Gussa's eyes nearly bulged from her head. She couldn't even imagine another world. Just running her fingers over the wood calmed her nerves and made her feel happy. "You're giving this to me?" The troll laughed. "No," he said. "I am giving you what is inside." Gussa was disappointed. "Oh." "It is nice," said Droog. His eyes lit up with amusement. "But I doubt this casket will help you along your path. No, I am giving you this." The troll lifted the lid and drew forth a helm. Inset along its rims in a brilliant circle were 5 gemstones, each one a different colour. At the top, carved deep into the metal surface, was a sigil or rune. It was a circle, broken into 5 wedged pieces by 5 different lines, like a wheel with 5 spokes. Droog handed the helm to Glissa. "It's beautiful." The elf ran her finger over the stones. A diamond, an emerald, a ruby, an onyx, and a sapphire. Each of them sparkled. Bosch waddled over, and Slobad lifted himself up on his tiptoes to get a better look. "What does it do?" Pontifex paced outside the door leading to the grand assembly chamber. Inside, the other members of the Synod waited. The Lord of the Vidalcan knew what to expect when he entered. He knew what they had planned. The whole scheme had unfolded in less than a cycle. Despite the very real power he now wielded over the Vidalcan people, and for that matter the Synod itself, he had been powerless to stop this. Sometimes the game of politics is simply more powerful than the politicians who play. Pontifex steeled himself and stepped forward. The doors before him slipped silently aside, and he entered the chamber. No one spoke, but the room was filled with shuffling sound of bodies trying to get comfortable. The assembled Vidalcan went still upon seeing him, and the room fell completely silent. The Grand Hall, as it was often referred to, was nothing more than a giant spiralling pit dug deep into the ground, wider at the top than it was at the bottom. The room itself had been designed by a Vidalcan architect who had taken its inspiration from the swirling storms and whirlpools of the Quicksilver Sea. A narrow platform, just wide enough to fit 2 Vidalcan guardsmen in full uniform side by side, wound down the edge of the pit, running in spiral form from the very ceiling to an open floor far below. To Pontifex it looked like a corkscrew, winding its way down into the bowels of Mirrodin. That image amused him, and he smirked. A railing skirted the edge of the spiraling platform. The original designer that had wanted the room to feel, and be, dangerous. One false step and a Vidalcan could find himself on the floor in a big hurry. Down lower, that wasn't really much of a problem, but from this height, falling that far he would be smashed to jelly. The room is dangerous, thought Pontifex as he looked down at the collected Vidalcan. Even with safety precautions. Gathered on the spiral, the assembled citizens of the Vidalcan Empire stood against the outer wall or leaned up against the railing. Where Pontifex stood at the top of the winding platform, he could see down on everyone, including the other 2 members of the Synod, who awaited him at the bottom. Beside them stood a third figure. Pontifex didn't know this man, but he knew what his presence here represented. "Lord Pontifex," said a voice from far below, "so nice of you to join us." The round, lifting design of the chamber allowed every word spoken to be heard by all. It mattered not if the speaker were on the floor or along the railing near the ceiling. All had a voice here. However, any citizen that spoke out of turn without being recognized was removed by force and thrown into hard labor for 2 moon cycles.
Many who had been punished in such a fashion didn't live long enough to be released back into society. Consequently, while inside the assembly chamber, very few spoke at all. Pontifex recognized the voice.
"Hello, Tyrell," he said, looking down at the floor at the Vidalcan. "It's always a pleasure to be in the esteemed company of my fellow Synod councillors."
He circled his finger in the air, indicating the collected Vidalcan in the assembly hall.
"And the elected citizen representatives."
He descended the long spiral platform towards the floor.
"Welcome."
Quiet clapping filled the room, and the Vidalcan representatives bowed their head as the Lord moved past. Pontifex loved this. He loved that people loved him. He had experienced nothing quite like it, and he relished every moment.
"Now that you have arrived,"
the Vidalcan's clapping stopped.
"may we proceed with the inauguration ceremony?"
These were not impatient words of Sodador, the younger, more hot-headed of the other two councillors. Sodador walked with an aid of a cane. Yes, thought Pontifex, looking at him with narrowed eyes, you are anxious to lead the synod. But the councillor's overzealous demeanour had won him the political power to challenge the previous leader, Janus. The latter had too many enemies. Ascending to the head of the synod was a nasty business. Assassinating one's predecessor didn't cast one in the most politically flattering light. It would be some time before Pontifex could overcome the negative image his rise to power on the body of Janus could have gained him. Pontifex smiled to himself. They might win this battle, but he'd make them pay.
"Oh my, this is embarrassing, Councillor Sodador," said the Vidalcan Lord. "Don't you think you're forgetting something?"
Pontifex was nearly halfway to the floor at this point. Sodador's features cleared.
"I am most certainly not. We have followed every parliamentary procedure in calling this special assembly of the elected representatives."
Pontifex stopped his ascent, stepping onto the railing between the two representatives. He raised a finger.
"Forgive me, Councillor Sodador, but isn't a vote of the council required before we can bring forth a member into the synod?"
"Certainly.
Before we have an inauguration, we must have a vote. I do not know about you, but I don't remember voting on the inclusion of this person into our council."
Pontifex pointed at the third figure on the floor.
"In fact, I've never been introduced to this man."
There was a slight gasp from several of the collected representatives, and both Sodador and Tyrell seemed to squirm. Pontifex smiled. Their scheme hadn't been covert, but now their motives for arranging the special assembly were called into question.
"Well," he said, resuming his downward spiral, "am I wrong?"
"As you will recall, Lord Pontifex," replied Tyrell, "this meeting was called in accordance with the law, which very specifically states that there must be 4 members seated on the synod at the start of each new moon cycle." Tyrell ran his hand over his bald scalp. "It is dark outside, my friend. The moon cycle has begun, and we have an empty seat to fill."
"Fill it we will. However, I think you will agree, just because we're slightly behind schedule doesn't mean we should abandon our long-standing tradition and procedures. Our laws, Tyrell, were written to protect us from hasty decisions. Let us interview our candidate and bring him before a vote of the representative, as a mandate for the synod, before we swear him in."
A light clapping followed.
"Our laws,"
shot back Sodador, "were written to protect us from a council chair who abuses his power." Pontifex looked hurt.
"Are you accusing me of something, Sodador?"
Sodador opened his mouth, but Tyrell raised his hand to stop him.
"Our young councillor accuses you of nothing, Lord Pontifex. He simply reeks of the conventions of balance."
The elder statesman turned to the assembled Vidalcan, standing above him on the spiral.
"As you all know, good citizens, the synod is a council of 4 members. Though there is rarely a conflict of opinion, from time to time it becomes necessary to break ties when the council members do not agree. It is at these times when the council chair casts a second vote."
Tyrell spun as he spoke, making eye contact with each and every one of the elected representatives as he did.
"Currently there are only 3 members of the synod. That is why you have been called here for this most unusual meeting. Many of you before have never set foot in this assembly hall. Many of you will never be compelled to do so again. But today is different. Today you must fill a fourth seat by wielding a single collective vote that will be cast in the event of a tie. Pontifex spoke in turn. Because of the unusual circumstance which has brought you all here together today, you have been given a rare glimpse into the workings of the Synod and how we, Pontifex indicated to the other two members of the Synod and himself, take into account the concerns and needs of the entire Vidalcan Empire. He nodded his head, smiling at the representatives. I, for one, am most excited. It is not every day you get to witness the governing council at work, much less participate in the ruling of your own sovereign body. I'm sure all of you are as excited by the prospect as I am, but I must take this opportunity to speak to you all about the grave importance of the decision we are about to make. Lord Pontifex stood up straight, his smile fading into a look of stern seriousness. Weigh your vote very carefully, for whomever you choose to fill that empty seat will rule on the Synod for life. Memnock ambled from his laboratory. The work he did outside the Panopticon was easy enough, but the journey to the Soul Trap fields and back would take him considerable time he would have to spend away from his infusion device. With serum storage tanks attached to his frame, it would take him even longer. The contraption kept him fully lubricated, but its bulk and weight slowed him down. No matter. He enjoyed his trips to the Soul Traps. Better to enjoy the work than to try and finish in the least amount of time. Besides, the metal tanks made Memnock feel as if he had before, when his body had been all metal. Perfect. The way it had been created. Do you think Memnock has forgotten? The Guardian shook his head. Of course you do not. The lift stopped and the door slipped open. Memnock was greeted with silence as he looked across the empty staging area at the base of the Panopticon. Before there had been 100 levelers arrayed here. Belil has taken them all. He takes his duty seriously. The bulbous, crab-like guardian of Mirrodin scuttled from the lift, then from his tower. The dimly lit interior was replaced by a blinding blue-white light of the mana core. High above the floor of the interior, the power core of the entire plane hissed and cracked with energy. Sometimes Memnock misses the darkness. Yes. It is much easier to work with constant source of light. Still, the convergence of the moons was a spectacular event. He stopped for a moment, putting one of his fingers on his lips. There is a minor convergence happening now, he said. Do you remember when the first moon shot from the core of the plane? Memnock moved on, shaking his head. No, I expected you would not. You were not here for that. Or for the next one. The Guardian scowled. Or for the next one. Or for the next one after that, come to think of it. Mirrodin was always dark when you were here. Oh, how things have changed. Memnock could see the tall chrome spires of the Microsoft up ahead. Touching the bases with Tarnis, they reached high into the sky, climbing from the ground up towards the mana core. Forests of these pointed towers dotted the interior of Mirrodin, from one side to the other. From Panopticon, Memnock could actually see how they curved with the slope of the round plane. The Guardian wasn't interested in these structures. They represented all that was wrong with Mirrodin now. True, he said as he approached the nearest of the columns. They are not the problem, they are the symptom, Memnock. Memnock does not like symptoms. Inside the forest of Microsynth, Memnock stopped and knelt. Below him, dozens of little fairy creatures scurried around, stopping when they encountered the large diamond-shaped boxes covered in mossy verdigris, spaced several meters apart. You would be proud of these, Master Khan, he said, reaching down to examine one of the boxes. These devices are Memnock's own creations. His own creations. We call them soul traps, and they keep Mirrodin populated. Gently brushing aside several of the fairy little creatures, the Guardian probed the sides of the diamond. It was soft, fleshy to his touch. This too, he said, poking the soft sides of the contraption. This is a symptom. If only Memnock knew what caused the symptoms, he could study it, understand it, cure it. Memnock looked down at his own arm. The flesh there was soft and supple, just like the sides of the trap and the fairy beast running around it on the floor of Mirrodin. It infects us all, corrupts perfection. Memnock gritted his teeth, squeezing his fists together until his arms turned bright red. It makes a mockery of all that the Creator built. Memnok's body began to shake. This is not how Memnok is supposed to be. You created Memnok in your image, and now Memnok is... He held his arms up, opening his whole body to the rays of the mana core. This! The bright blue-white light seared into Memnok's eyes, and tears ran down his face. Except for the electrical hiss the mana core gave off, the rest of the interior of Mirrodin was silent. Finally, the Guardian let his hands fall to his sides. A floating patch of orange filled his vision. For a moment, Memnok lost his connection to a solid world. Vertigo filled his head, and the Guardian lost his balance. He stepped back to catch himself, and his foot slipped on something soft. He heard a popping noise and slipped. Memnok fell. All four of his legs folded underneath him, and his serum tank made a tremendous clang as it hit the ground. "My is Memnok, punish so," he moaned. The Guardian rested on his side, not moving, the burning orange sphere obscuring his sight, slowly drifting away, and Memnok looked out as a puddle of red fluid covering the ground around him. Blood? Do we see blood? Lifting himself to his feet, he examined his body. His entire side was slick with blood, but he felt no pain. Poking and prodding at his partially fleshy limbs, Memnok searched for wounds, but found none. On the ground near his feet, the furry little creatures scuttled around, avoiding the bloody mess as best they could. Our Grendels? Have our Grendels turned completely to flesh? Memnok bent down and picked up one of the crushed furry creatures. A feeling of overwhelming sadness crept over him, and he shook his head as he looked down on the dead creature in his hands. Is this what will happen to Memnok? Druge held up a finger. By itself, the helm will aid you in battle. Your blows will strike harder. Your moves will be faster. In concert with the Sword of Caldra and the Shield of Caldra, it will do much more. The Sword of Caldra? What's that? Druge lifted a massive hand and pointed to Gus's hip. The blade you took from Chumph. Gussa pulled her hand back. You mean it's part of a set? Yes, more appropriately, it is part of a key. Slobad's ears perked up. How does this key open, huh? It is not so much of a key to open something as a key to activate a powerful being. Slobad's ears picked up. Artifact, huh? Where can we find this powerful artifact? Not an artifact. Slobad slumped, disappointed. You must travel to the swamps of the Mephedros, Druge continued. There you will find the Shield of Caldra. The troll held out his hand. May I see your sword? Gussa looked hesitantly at Slobad, then at Bosch. The golem stood silently behind her, as he had during the entire interview, ready for anything. The sight of her hulking friend calmed Gussa's nerves, and she pulled her sword from its sheath, handing it over to the troll. Droog ran his fingers over the blade's hilt, examining the etchings and runes inscribed there. You see this? He said after a moment, turning the handle towards the trio and indicating a circular groove. At the centre of the groove, the same circular rune broke into 5 parts that had been inscribed. This is where your sword's hilt will attach to the shield when you find the last part of the Caldra Guardian. The Caldra Guardian? Yes, replied the troll. The Guardian is an avatar, a very powerful one. Once you have all 3 pieces, you must assemble them, and the Guardian will come to life. Wait, if the trolls knew about this being before, why didn't Chumph tell me about it? Droog pawed his crutch. You are not ready. Not ready? You did not believe, Master Chumph. Now that you know your destiny, you are ready. I still don't understand what it is I'm destined to do. The troll smiled. One step at a time, he said. Your journey will be long. Do not try and do it all in one day. A loud boom echoed over the Tree of Tales, and for the first time since they arrived, the trolls in the bleacher seats stirred, lumbering up from where they were seated. The entire troll clan separated into 4 groups, filing from the room in an orderly fashion. What's that? What's happening? Asked Gussa. Droog placed the casket back inside the cabinet and shut the door. The Tree of Tales is under attack. Millil stood atop his personal leveler. The power of the serum still held him tightly in its grasp. The world had coalesced, and he had come back to Mirrodin just as Memnok had told him he would. But the world to which he returned was different now. He understood better the way things worked, but that wasn't what had changed. Before him, arrayed and ready for battle, were nearly 100 other levelers, each one of them under his command. He looked out on them with a measure of pride. It was odd, this sensation. Many times before, Malil had stood just in this place, but never once had felt anything. Now his mind raced. They had tracked the elf to the tangle, to this very tree. The leveler army had surrounded it. Malil had the foresight to bring along 2 crushers, mammoths with curved horns on their heads and a single huge cylindrical wheel in front, capable of rolling over almost nearly anything and squashing it completely flat. In the past, he'd used these creations mostly to level human villages or flatten patches of grazer grass. Now these behemoths were both assaulting the tree. Each of the artifact creatures took turns backing up and rolling forward, smashing headlong into the base of the tree. The pounding noise they made sounded musical to Malil. The first crusher clanged into the tree again as the other pulled back for another run. The vibrating note of the last attack had almost fallen to silence when a flood of green oozed from the tree. At first Malil thought it might be some sort of organic fluid. He had seen Memnarch bleed before, had even seen the humans and elves bleed, but they were caught between the scythe blades of the leveler. Maybe this tree was bleeding. The green fluid began to strike the levelers and crushers, and Malil knew that this was no fluid after all. Trolls. Levelers were hurled away from the advancing green tide. The crushers stopped their attack, covered by a host of trolls. "Kill them!" shouted Malil, and the rest of the leveler army moved in, tightening the noose around the tree and the trolls. "What do we do? Levelers have us trapped, huh?" "We're going to fight," said Glyssa. She grabbed the hilt of the sword of Cauldron and took a step forward, but Druga's crutch barred her way. "No path does not lead out this door," said the troll chieftain, indicating the arched front entrance of the tree. "It leads to the center of Mirrodin." "Wherever I'm supposed to go, I can't get there if I don't get out of this damned tree. We have to fight. We have no choice. Besides, your trolls could use the help." The elf pointed to the battle raging just a few yards from them. The forest beasts torn away at many of the artifact creatures to bits. Piles of metal parts littered the ground, but among them were fallen forms of several trolls. "My trolls can take care of themselves," replied Druge. "Now you must take care that you do not easily play into Memnarch's hands." "You think this army is here to find me?" "I do not think. I know. Follow me." Despite his missing leg, Droog moved faster than she'd ever seen a troll go, and Glyssa struggled to keep up. Glyssa looked down at her sword. "Wait, where do I find the last piece of the Cauldron Guardian?" The troll did not turn, continuing to lead Glyssa, Slowbad, and Bosch from the tree. "You must find Geth. He has what you are looking for." Glyssa looked to Slowbad. "Geth again? Crazy troll can't find another shield." Glyssa shook her head. "You're the one who was so excited about a new artifact to tinker with." She shrugged. "Guess we head back to the Vault of Whispers. If only we'd known last time, we could have saved ourselves a trip." Droog, standing taller than any except Bosch, looked at each of them in the eye and returned to stare at Glyssa. "You must get to the Methadros quickly. Do not stay here and fight, or the sacrifice of these many trolls will be in vain." Pontifex lowered his wide-headed halberd and lunged at Marek. "These are trying times, my friend." The Vidalcan elite guard commander parried the blow, then countered, pushing Pontifex back a step. "Well done," complimented the Vidalcan lord. He steadied himself, then began weaving his blade in a series of practice palatines. Marek watched the tip of the halberd as it moved through the air. "I knew the probable outcome, but I hadn't expected such an ununanimous vote." Pontifex continued moving his weapon, attempting to lull his opponent with gentle motion. "Does it really matter, my lord? If the representatives vote with one voice, there is no difference between approval from most and from all. The outcome is the same." Marek kept his guard up. "True, true," replied Pontifex. He watched Marek, following the hypnotic pattern of the blade. "Still, this sort of thing could lead to a very dangerous changes inside the Empire." The Vidalcan lord struck. His blade moved forward, but instead of moving back, following his patterns, he's lunging further, catching Marek off guard. The blade spanked off of the warrior's shoulder pad, and Pontifex pulled back. Marek went down, trying to dodge too late. Well done, my lord, said Marek, looking up at Pontifex from the ground. Pontifex placed the butt of his weapon on the ground and extended free hands to Marek. Thank you, he said, and he helped the warrior back to his feet. The two placed their halberds in a rack against the wall, and Pontifex grabbed a towel to wipe the sweat from his gleaming bald head. Marek scratched his chin. Forgive my ignorance, my lord, but what sort of dangerous changes? Pontifex took a deep breath. If the representatives get a real taste of power, they may try to be a part of the synod on a more regular basis. If that happens, the council will lose some, if not most of its power, and we cannot have... The Vidalcan lord stood up. Perhaps more disturbing. What would be more possibly disturbing would be the possible erosion of my authority. If my representatives think they can challenge everything I do with the vote, I will be forced to take some drastic measures. And if they are successful... Pontifex let out a laugh. Can you imagine the chaos that would ensue in every decision I made had to be voted upon before it could be enacted? Really, the damage caused to the Empire by such a process would be an irrevocable disaster. A knock came from the door, interrupting the Vidalcan lord. I won't have it, he said to Marek in a whisper. He straightened his robes and turned to the door. Enter. The door slid open. Sodador and Tyrell stepped through, followed by a third Vidalcan, the newest member of the synod. Orland, what an unexpected surprise! The third member nodded and stepped forward. Pontifex looked him over. This Vidalcan had a slight build, even for his relatively frail race. His forearms were long and skinny, and seemed out of proportion to his short body. Pontifex drew himself up to his full height, noting that he overtopped the man by nearly an entire head. Lord Pontifex, it is my honour and privilege to stand before you as an equal and colleague. Thank you for allowing us an audience. The pleasure is all mine. Please, come sit down. He guided the other three councillors to form-fitting high-backed chairs surrounding the sturdy table. When all of the men were seated, Pontifex cleared his throat. To what do I owe the honour of your visit? Orland opened his mouth to speak, but Sodador cut him off. Forgive us, Lord Pontifex, but this is official synod business. He looked at Marek. Would you be so as kind to excuse the commander? Pontifex scowled. Might I remind you, Sodador, that you are inside my personal chambers. Marek is an honourable man and my trusted servant. While there are guests, I require a bodyguard. Oh, please. We are no threat to you. This is official business, interjected Tyrell. How can we be expected to speak freely if we have an audience? Orland looked at Marek, then turned to both Sodador and Tyrell. Gentlemen, please, Lord Pontifex has been gracious enough to allow him into his chamber. We should respect his wishes. Pontifex looked at the new councillor. Perhaps this one could be of some use after all. Thank you, Councillor Orland, he smiled. As you were saying? Yes, we have come to you of my urging. I realize the circumstances surrounding my appointment to the synod were unorthodox. I just want to make sure that my presence in the decision-making process is not seen as an invasion. My dear Orland, whatever would make you think such preposterous things? The representatives voted in a legal assembly. The outcome is indisputable. Orland nodded. Precisely. But if I were in your position, I might feel as if I had been fooled. Sodador and Tyrell squirmed in their seats. I've come to you on a mission of diplomacy, continued Orland, to make available to you my services, as a token of respect and dedication to the greater good of the Vidalcan people. Pontifex was puzzled. What do you have in mind? Orland smiled. Helping you catch the elf girl, of course.